Hi everybody, and welcome to Injuries, a course in prevention and management. I'm Paige Elizabeth, this is Maddie Kay, she'll be assisting me today. And we're gonna go into the world of injuries, which ironically for yoga is pretty common. So this course is gonna cover a list of things that you can incorporate into your practice to become more aware so that way you're less prone to injury. If you've already experienced an injury, we're actually going to cover some of the classic body parts that tend to get tripped up and how to manage those injuries so that way you don't have to forfeit your practice. All right, everybody, the first thing that we're actually going to talk about is prevention, because we want to prevent as many issues in our practice as we possibly can. My background is primarily in Ashtanga, and Maddie's background is in Vinyasa flow. So we see different things, even though they're similar types of practices, we see different things as teachers. So we're actually going to talk to you guys about what we see and how to prevent those things. And I'll let Maddie go first. What do you normally see students do that can easily be prevented in your room?
Well, I would say they go past their limits. When a teacher cues a certain alignment, if they're not listening or paying attention, then they don't make the adjustment, even if the teacher is talking directly to you. The other thing is with chaturangas, especially in a vinyasa class, when you're moving through that motion again and again, at the start of class, you might be able to do all of them completely with your alignment safe. But as the class goes on, and this probably is true during an Ashtanga practice, for a beginner, you might need to start putting your knees down to keep your alignment safe. So that's one of the big ones, is just honoring where your body is at, whether you're having a good day or a bad day. Just knowing whether you're beginner or advanced and how that changes throughout your practice. If it's a 60-minute class or 75, it doesn't matter. Just tune in with each posture.
Yeah, I think it's important to first and foremost be present, okay? So often when I work with students, they are not, in their body. And what does that mean? That means that while they're standing on their mat doing a sun salutation, they're actually thinking about the back bend they're going to do later, right?
To-do list.
Yeah, they're not in their body. That's right. They're thinking about what they have to do when they leave the yoga practice. You know what I mean? Or, oh, I forgot to call so and so back. Being present is one of the best ways to actually prevent injury, because then you're aware of what's happening in your body at all times. You can feel it. And then being able to move on the breath. If you don't have a good breath practice, right, a good connection to your ujjayi, then that will also trip you up in your practice as well. Because when you move on the breath, the body has a way of expanding and contracting with the breath patterns. So, you want to make sure that you're conscious of your breath and linking it to your movements as well. So definitely be in your body, definitely move on the breath, and then ego. Like Maddie was saying, ego is a huge thing. Everyone wants to bite off more than they can chew. And it takes a lot of maturity, I think, to be like, look, I'm not at my best today, so I'm not going to, try to operate at my best. I'm going to honor where I'm at. There's no skin off your back by having an easier practice one day than another. And if you're not ready for a pose, don't try to jump into it, because you'll just hurt yourself. Injuries don't just show up in joints and ligaments. You can damage your soft tissue as well by moving too quickly into a pose, too aggressively into a pose. You definitely won't benefit long term. The only thing that you're gaining is a split second of pleasure from that ego, and I promise you it's not worth it.
No, definitely not. I would say that for beginners, when you're doing an advanced class or something where you're pushing your limits a lot, start to use your visualization skills to really work it deeper. Start to feel what do you feel in the hands? See if you can think of what your muscles would be doing if you went to that next step. Don't necessarily do it, but just start to imagine and go for it. And that's a safer approach, especially if you're a beginner in an all levels class.
Yeah, you can also ask for help, okay? Just like you might not want to receive an adjustment, maybe you're trying to impress the teacher or the girl next to you, right? So you allow the teacher to move you deeper into a pose that really you're not ready for. Okay, like that's definitely something you want to stop doing. But on the flip side of that, if you think you can do it, ask for help. You know, say, hey, I really want to try this, or I really want to do this. How do I do it safely? What are the mechanics involved so that I can attempt this without injuring myself? Okay, there's a lot of poses I know in the Ashtanga sequence where if your hips aren't open, for example, your knees will blow out, all right? If you constantly are doing arm balances, your frame will wear down. So there's a lot more involved in the asanas than, like, I think is to the naked eye. And so if you're not sure what certain poses entails, ask. Don't be so like caught up in trying to impress everybody that you end up hurting yourself, because injuries can be long term. I had a knee injury once that took 6 months to just be somewhat okay, and then I actually had to change my diet to heal it completely, okay, and it took a long time. So, you know.
Don't force yourself into a back bend just for an Instagram photo. It's not worth it, it's not healthy. Know the difference between discomfort and pain. Discomfort and struggling with something might be okay if you're staying with your breath, but once you find that point of pain, your body's asking you to back off. And hopefully your instructor or your practice is developed enough that you know at what point that is and what you should be feeling before you go to that next stage.
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with, like, you know, what is too far, what is too much? So, like, what would you define as the difference between, like, you know, this is uncomfortable and this is painful? What's your definition of that?
Well, the one I use whenever I teach yin classes is I tell people that if you're feeling a knife-like sensation, that means something sharp and very localized, then that's pain. If it's just a general discomfort or soreness, that can be normal. Any tingling sensation or numbness, that qualifies as pain. Anytime you're feeling numb, it's because you're compressing a nerve and you don't want to do that. So.
Right. Usually I tell students that pain lies in the body, discomfort lies in the mind. Okay?
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah, like legitimate pain is going to be like a pinching sensation, like she said, or like, oh, I'm going numb. You know, it's a literal, like, stop sign your body is giving you. Discomfort can be disguised as pain, but it's not. It's your brain telling you, I don't like this. And it'll make up reasons
right.
why.
If you're a person who avoids working hard, then when you get into those poses, like say chair, for example, a lot of people don't like sitting in a chair for a long time, then maybe you start to shake or you start to kind of fall out of the pose and fall out of alignment and you think, oh, this hurts, I should, you know, stand up or fold out of this early rather than honoring, nope, you still have 2 more breaths here.
Right, yeah.
Stick it out sometimes.
Yeah, the brain has a really beautiful way of being like, abort, 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 when actually nothing's wrong, okay? You just don't feel comfortable, and a lot of times it's because psychologically it's new, physically it's new, and emotionally it's bringing up stuff. But legitimate pain is going to be a physical sensation, okay? And a physical boundary that your body is trying to give you to say, hey, this isn't good, stop. Now, even with that, sometimes you might have physical sensations, okay? And, you know, this can be probably a topic in and of itself, you know, because how do you even measure some of those?
Well, pain is a very individual experience.
Right.
They never, even when you go to the hospital, your pain is right on a 1 to 10 scale, and it's your perception of that pain. You might think getting, you know, scraped on the arm is a 1, but for some person or a child, that could be extremely traumatic. So
right.
It depends on your exposure to pain in the past.
A lot of times I'll tell students if they think that they're hitting a danger zone to move out, and if they're still having that physical sensation, then we know we've gone too far. But the second that they move away from that, if it goes away, it's usually just them going to their edge.
Yeah, or you can use the breath. Like I think you had me do in one of our privates, is that if you can take a deep breath and maintain the pose, then you're probably safe. If you try to take a breath and it feels wiry or wrong, then it's normally a good sign that you should come out of it.
Yeah. So, you know, bear all this in mind that when you're stepping onto your mat to do your practice, that, you know, you're present, you're in your body, you're connected to your breath, and you're not coming from ego, okay? You're honoring your physical body, your emotional body, your energetic body, and you're not like trying to prove something. The practice is incredibly intelligent, and I promise you, if you try to prove something, the practice will tell you who's in charge every time. And to avoid these harsh lessons, you know what I mean? Just remove the ego and just tell yourself, like, I want a long-term practice. I personally, gave up some very advanced aspects of my own practice for a while because I just couldn't gauge where I was at. And for me personally, it wasn't important to have the deep back bends. It was more important for me to have a long-term practice. So until I could find what I needed to go deeper safely, I just didn't. And that probably took about 5 years for me, because I just didn't have the right resources and the right teacher during that time. But I'm glad I didn't force myself, because some injuries are permanent, and we don't want that. We want to actually, again, have that longevity in our practice. So, and also just, again, like I said in the beginning, from day to day, right? What you could do on Monday might not be the same practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. So,
And compare yourself only to yourself during that practice. Don't compare yourself to your practice yesterday or the person next to you. Whenever I cue, especially breath-guided vinyasa, your inhale and your exhale might be longer or shorter than the person next to you. You can't move at that person's pace, or even your instructor's pace. If they're moving too fast for you, slow down. Honor your practice and your breath. Don't rush through postures. That's how you get injured, and don't rush out of them.
Yeah, exactly. There's a process. So, you have anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I think we touched on all of it.
For prevention? Yeah, very important. Very, very, very important. And then again, if you do get injured, that's where this course is headed. We're actually going to break down all the classic injuries, what tends to cause them and how you can manage them. All right, so the first classic injury that we are going to go over is actually the hamstrings. Thank God I've never actually had a hamstring injury. Mine tend to go on for miles. I have other issues that I deal with. But the hamstrings are really common. People tear them, and typically how it happens is it's from the hip attachment, or the sit bone attachment, right? Turn around, Maddie. Okay, so here's the deal with the hamstrings, okay? There's all different kinds of ways to modify going in and dealing with, once you've already injured. But here's the rule, okay? They're attached to your sit bone here. If you feel like you're getting a stretch on the sit bone, back off. You're not supposed to stretch the attachment, okay? This is your hamstring. This is where it inserts, and you want to be careful of that. You don't want to pull that. People who have tight hamstrings, what happens is if they don't work the hamstring properly, then the attachment gives out, okay? And this is a long-term injury for a lot of people, okay? At least 6 months to fully recover from this one. So we really don't want to...
It's a tricky one.
Yeah, we don't want to pull our hamstrings, right? So, prevention. Couple of things that you can do, all right? First of all, bend your knees. Neither one of us are Bikram teachers. Neither one of us are ever going to tell you to lock your knee, okay? So, micro bend the knee. So let's say she's doing Trikonasana, all right? Now you can actually see pretty easily on her how she kind of bows into her knee. She's got a little bit of hypermobility there. Now if she's feeling her sit bones, then we know that we're not working our hamstrings properly. So what she needs to do is push through the foot and bend her knee. Yes. Move your hand back, there you go. Bend your knee, and that's even probably more than she needs to bend. That would be a good place to micro bend. You can do more, but you don't have to do more. You just need enough to take the pressure off of the actual attachments themselves, okay? So, bending into it. The other thing that you can do, let's say you're doing a seated forward fold, right? I like this thing. Me too. If you're like a really tight guy, which I see a lot, just saying, you can put a bolster or a blanket under your knees and fold forward, all right? This automatically is going to relax the hamstring so that way you're not pulling into the sit bones, okay? And lastly, if you don't want to use the bolster, then it's really important that you actually are mindful of engaging your quadriceps, right? and flexing your feet back, okay? But again, only do this if it feels safe. We want to work the hamstring, not the attachment at the sit bone, okay? Super, super, super important. Now, she and I have different ways of actually addressing the injury. Okay, so let's say you're like, I've already injured this. It's really getting it's getting in the middle of my practice. I feel like I can't practice. What can I do?
So the first thing I would have students do is always practice with a strap. If they have that kind of injury, it allows a bit more length in the body, so they can be a bit more relaxed, and it's okay. Whether it's in a seated position like this, or if they're in one of the standing postures as well. The other one is just, again, that mindfulness here, and they can bend the knees and just work up to the insertion point in the knee, and they're still benefiting the hamstring from that point without hopefully irritating this. What would you have them do?
I actually have them point the toes, right? In a forward fold position, typically we're going to flex our feet, okay? But once you point the toe, you completely change the action in the hamstring, okay? And what this does is it relaxes the attachment point. It doesn't, like it creates a, what's it called? Is it a flexion? Because it's not an extension anymore. Yeah, when you flex, you're actually extending from the attachment, but then once you point the toe, you bring it back and you give it space so that it's relaxed at the actual attachment. So I know it sounds kind of funky if you're an Ashtangi and you're doing all the primary series with pointed toes, but you'll feel a lot better. You'll have 10 times less pain at the attachment, and you'll be able to go through your practice without actually feeling like, you know, you're handicapped. So. That seems to have worked when I've told students who have injured that attachment, that if they point their toes, it's pretty good. Some of the bigger guys, usually I'll have them, you know.
Use the bolster.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially like whenever I teach in classes, use the bolster to have people relax into the hamstrings a bit more in general. But I think everything you said will help as well. I might have to try that pointed toes method.
Yeah. Definitely is a favorite of those I've helped, you know, the females, the women. Guys, the bigger guys, I tend to give different instructions for. They just have them lay off altogether.
You know, but boys don't want to secretly be ballerinas? Come on.
No, it's just that like women can fold forward more easily, on average, the ones I've dealt with. So this way they don't have to compromise their forward fold, because now they're safe. A lot of times guys, they just tried too hard. So instead of trying to bring them to the feet, I just bring the feet to them.
Makes sense.
So that's usually the bigger, tighter guys. When I work with them, that's usually what I do. Women, I just have them point their toes. But you know your body best, so play with it. You know, and you can also floint your toes if you are trying to prevent the injury. That's really good too. You can also like do all your forward folds this way, if you think that you might.
Even that activation in something like Trikonasana, where you're pulling up the toes like that, can help, as you notice, that hyperextension of the knee, kind of a similar problem. You push through the ball of the foot like that, even in your standing posture, so it can help prevent the injury as well.
Yeah, you never want to push into a joint or push into an attachment. You always want to work from the joints or from the attachments, okay? So, your trees are strong. You're not grinding away at the roots, because if you grind away at the roots, then you've got no stability. Okay, now we're going to move on to my favorite part of the body, which is the knees. I've blown out both my knees, but I've also managed to work with my injuries, heal my injuries, and move on to a very, very deep integrated practice. So, you know, don't ever let injury stop you. All right, so with the knees, there are two things that I noticed. The first thing is when we're working with our foundation. So Maddie is here, she's in a warrior stance, and a lot of times what happens is people don't know how to work from their root, okay? So in this particular situation, we're trying to figure out how to distribute our weight, all right? And people are a little clumsy about this. So one thing to keep in mind is you always want to work from the base up. Okay, you don't want to push your weight into your foot, you want to push the foot up. If you do this, you create stability and you save your body parts, all right? So, for example, here, if someone were really like not flexible, right, and they couldn't go very far, then they would modify and they would come maybe to here. not a problem, okay?
Yeah, you can always shorten the stance.
The problem I think I see most often isn't even if you go beyond the knee. Because if you're working from the root, even that is safe. That's a huge way to work your quadricep, actually. It's fabulous. The problem that we see is actually if someone is trying to borrow strength. And so what happens is the leg goes this way or the leg goes this way. And now we're setting up our knee for a problem. And so you always want to make sure that even if you can't go fully into the pose, that you're working where you can and you're working from the root up, okay? So this is a common one, and this is just to show you, like, whether you're in tree pose, regardless, Digasana, or you're doing, another form of warrior, you want to make sure that you're always working from the base up. Never lock your knees, because you can damage them really badly, okay? You'll wear away at the joint over time, and that's not good. And the ligaments too, right?
Yeah, especially in single leg standing poses, if you're not activating the quad while you're standing there, then you damage the ligaments through the knee. So that's where a lot of those injuries happen, and it takes years of practice, so it might feel really good to lock out your knee for the first year or two, and then a few years later you blow out your knee and wonder what happened.
Yeah, that would be like a chronic, like when you're sitting at a computer and then like 2 years later you're like, why do my shoulders kill me, right? And now you've got numbness in your hands, for example. Like that's a repetitive abuse injury, that's not going to show up the next day. You're not going to pop your knee, you're just going to wear it out, okay? The thing that I notice in the Ashtanga system is where we deal with rotation, okay? And everybody wants to get into the deep rotations. And, the body is so intelligent, all right? And it always wants to work on your behalf. But here's the problem. If you don't give the body space, if you don't show the body where the mobility needs to go or where the work needs to be done, the body is going to default to wherever it thinks it's best, okay? So what I see a lot is people's hips not being open, and then they blow out their knees, okay? I've blown out both. I can tell you the signs. I was just really mobile, so I wasn't working my hips as well as I could have. And then when I started to go deeper, that's when my knees started to take the brunt of it. And honestly, if I were to tell you the truth, I blew out my right one doing aerial and my left one doing sprints. But yoga didn't help when I was trying to work through them. So I had to be really creative. And again, most students, right? Like if you're trying to do your lotus and it's here, don't force the rotation in the knee, okay? The body will default to the point of least resistance, and that is going to be the knee, okay? Knee injuries are tough, especially if you blow out your meniscus or something. Those are really hard to recover from, and you're never quite the same afterwards, all right? So even though I have full rotation, I always know when it's going to rain, okay? I have to be very clean with my diet. Like there are ways that I work with my body to make sure that I can maintain that rotation, but I will never be the same that I was before I injured myself, okay? So if you find that you're trying to get, let's say Ardha Baddha Padma, Paschimottanasana, you're trying to get into this pose and you're trying to find the clasp, okay? Do not force the knee down. Do not force the rotation. If you get to this point and that hurts your knee, back out, okay? Because you need to put the work in your hips. The hips are what needs to open. What I tell students often as well is that when you're preparing to open your hips, sometimes coming from an externally rotated place can be harder on the knees than if you operate from an internally rotated place. And it's real easy to know the difference because everything connects into the hips here, okay? So if we're going to externally rotate, that means the pelvis is actually going to be facing forward and up, okay? Which now requires my knee to go out before I can go in. That is going to put more stress on my knees. Okay, if you've already blown out your knee, you're going to want to internally rotate, okay? You're going to want to take the work into the hip, which means that you actually pull the sit bones back. You can do the standing or you can do the seated, okay? You're gonna tilt the pelvis actually backwards and down. Then you're gonna move the foot into position. And now we're operating internally instead of externally, okay? And we're protecting our knee.
I can't get my foot.
Right?
Yeah, my knee's definitely not there yet. And if an instructor ever forces your knee down, that's when you tell them, hey, not yet, this isn't right for me, and I feel the pain here, I don't feel it in my hip yet. You really have to communicate those things, especially in a guided class. The instructor can't read your mind, even if you're trying to express something on their face. We're not mind readers, and you would rather be confident that the person is going to adjust you in a way that's going to help you rather than harm you.
Yeah, if you're doing a hip opener, then it's a hip opener, not a knee opener, okay? So
no pain in the knee.
yeah, that should be your cue right there. Baddha Konasana, same thing. If you have already injured your knees, take your feet wider, okay? There is no need to bring it in and to cause stress on the knees. You take your feet wider, send your hips back, move into position. Now you're not putting any stress on the knee and you're still working what?
The hip.
Yes.
Magic.
Because that's what we want to do, is we want to open our hips, not our knees, okay? Most of us have very tight IT bands, okay? And so this is part of that connection into the hip, right? And that's basically what happens, is we go into a hip rotation of some sort, right? And it's this that doesn't want to bend. It's tied to the hip, which is really tight. And over time, it just pulls, and then one day it pops.
And the pain on that IT band sometimes can feel like it almost radiates under the back of the knee. So say you're trying to get the legs behind the head or something like that, when you start to feel that pain there, then back off.
The IT band is particularly sensitive, and it's very difficult to, beat this guy up. So typically what he does is he beats up everything else. So you want to work with him, right? You don't want to work against him. And if you're starting to find a sensation in the back of your knee where it's tight, right? You don't quite have pain, but it's tight all of a sudden, you know you're headed for an injury, okay? That's usually the first sign that a knee injury is about to happen. And it doesn't happen behind the knee. It happens right here in the front. Okay, this is where it pops, okay? This is where the button pops off the blouse. It's not over here, okay? This is where the seam is really strong. This is where it's weak, okay? So you wanna make sure that if you're feeling anything here, that you go, okay, where am I not opening here? All right, super, super, super important. Knees, if you don't have them, it's really rough to get through life. So don't beat up your knees, okay? Anything else you'd like to say about the knees?
No, I don't think so. Just keep that micro bend and keep your alignment, keep that knee tracking over that second toe if it's in a standing position at least.
Yeah, if you've already injured the knee, like I said, internally rotate from the hip. You don't have to go as deep, pull the leg up, and then take it as far as you can until you have that. Keep pulling the hips back, right? This will take pressure off the knee, right? And just keep going as far as you can. And then
if you're in a yin class or vinyasa or ashtanga, you can always just take a block underneath this knee to kind of give it a little bit of support and maybe just prevent yourself from going too far if you've injured yourself.
Right. Yeah, I guess if you're in virasana, then you can also, if you're feeling pressure here from an injury, you can just...
Yeah, or if you're sitting here and this already bothers the knees, you can take a block underneath as well to elevate.
Yeah, if you feel pressure on your knees, do not force a pose, okay? Ever. So, yes, very important. And don't feel, I know in the Ashtanga world it's kind of frowned upon to modify your injuries. That's all dogma, that's all ego, that's all like rules being, projected onto you. It's your body and it's your practice, and honor that, okay? If you want a long-term practice, you need to do what's best for you. Throw out the rule book, get a block out, get a pillow out, do whatever you need to do to modify yourself in the interim so you can continue long-term. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the lower back. This is another common area that people tend to beat up. And a lot of times it's because they're just not bending in properly. A lot of times students, they have a tendency to bend from the waist, right, instead of bending from the heart area. So, you know, over time the sacroiliac joints become inflamed, and then you just don't want to bend, and it hurts. Yeah, and it's
some of it can come from people who have desk jobs and they're already slouching down so much that there is no lift in the spine anymore.
Yeah, and it's one of those that doesn't, it's usually not like, you know, oh, I sprained my ankle kind of injury. It's more of like a chronic aggravation. And the pose that we see the most where people are learning improperly and therefore having low back pain is upward dog, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and face that way, dear. So people will straighten their arms and they'll kind of like, you're already kind of bendy, so go forward, actually, yeah. So typically a lot of times, and engage your legs, so you're really high off the floor. So they'll be forward, right? They're tight in their shoulders and their upper back, and all of it comes here, okay? You don't want that. Don't force it. Don't force the upward dog position. What I recommend you do is drop your hips completely on the floor and relax. Relax the buttocks, relax the front body into the floor, and then from here, if you're not getting relief, bend your elbows. Pull your heart through more. And if you're still not getting relief, go into cobra. Yeah, and just keep working this position until you actually can get the strength and the opening that you need to take it into a full upward dog position. Take your arms back a little bit, your hands back. Yeah, and push through your hands, and then take yourself, there you go. So now she's working more of this opening, and she's not taking it here. We actually, go ahead and come down, we actually want to keep the low back neutral at all times. Back bends are not like hip bends or waist bends.
Yeah, waist bends.
But I see this more often than not where this happens.
Yeah, there's no lift.
Yeah, this is where they take the bend. They puff the hips and they dump everything, and that will destroy your low back over time.
And at first it can feel easier to do that because, you know, you're not having to activate to lift up as much, but in the long run, your practice and your back bends will thank you for it.
Yeah, your body is, like I said, it's always going to default to what's easiest, but easiest is not always healthiest. Okay, so what you want is to keep the pelvis neutral at all times. I don't care what your back bend is, okay? Back bends go thoracic up to cervical, okay? They are not lumbar. This is totally neutral. If it's not protected by the rib cage, you don't use it to bend, okay? Rule of thumb, you keep it neutral. So instead of being here, we take the bend here, okay? Into the heart, lift the chest, okay? This might require a little more engagement in your roots so you can push down and lift up, okay, regardless of the back bend that you're in. But you want to pull it out of the low back and into the heart area, okay? Another classic problem, people squeeze their butts. Like they over-engage the glute muscles, okay? That has a direct correlation because it pulls from the lower spine and the sacrum. So like all through here, go ahead and face this way, dear. All through here and here, okay? You squeeze this, it's gonna pull all of this, okay? So you wanna learn to relax your hips when you're doing back bends, okay? Unless you want sciatica, which that will be a fast track to getting it. But over squeezing the glutes, it's not what you want. And this is probably one of the hardest things for students to unlearn, is how to relax their hips and find the work they need without engaging the buttocks.
For sure. So you want to think of that lifting motion, whether it's in your, high crescent lunge or your camel or your standing back bend. It doesn't matter what it is. And as Paige said, whatever the roots are, whether it's your hands, your legs, your knees, you want to root down, lengthen and grow taller, and then take the back bend from there.
Okay, now we're going to talk about like herniated or bulged discs in the spine. 99% of these injuries, they get them elsewhere. They're not typically from the yoga practice. And if they are, I've seen them in a couple of men, and they're bigger men, and usually what happens is because they're so strong and they're trying to go forward in their forward folds, they literally like they pull the disc. Like that's what's happened. I've seen that on I think 3 occasions, but they're just big men and they muscled their way through it. So don't do that. Okay, be very mindful. Neither one of us are medical professionals, as stated in the beginning, okay? So these are just classic injuries that we see if you want to continue your practice, and pretty much how to prevent or modify, okay? Now, typically with the bulging discs, you would not do any twists, okay? Agreed?
My mom recently herniated 2 discs in her back, and that was the biggest thing that came from the physical therapy was your twist might look like this, and that's as far as you go. There's not going to be any deep binds or super crazy twists in your practice for a little while, and just listen to your physical therapist and your doctor about when you can reincorporate those things back into your practice safely.
Yeah. One thing that is actually pretty nice on a bulging disc is actually back bends. Back bends do kind of the opposite. If you pull the disc, then kind of back bending pulls it back into place. So it's a nice way to alleviate an issue, but still be gentle. If you're going to do forward folds, do a back bend in them, right? Don't round. Actually try to keep your chin lifted, your sternum up, and forward fold with a back bend in the spine, okay? It's super important, especially with these kind of injuries, that you're very, very careful. You know, the spine is the nervous system. If you damage your spine and you damage your nervous system, now we're dealing with, you know, the ability to move your arm, the ability to speak properly.
You don't want it to be a lifelong injury. You want it to be something that you can recover from, even though an injury like this does normally take a year or 2.
Yeah, I mean, as a yoga teacher, I'm very, very, very hands-off with people who have these issues. I literally go with what the doctor says to do for the most part, and I don't really give a whole lot of advice beyond that because this is such a touchy area to deal with. So you want to be extremely cautious. Make sure you've seen a doctor if you do have a bulge or herniated disc, and you know, follow their orders.
And you'll know, you'll be in intense pain when it happens and need to go to the emergency room. Hopefully it never occurs in your yoga practice. From what I've heard, it happens pretty randomly when you're just like reaching back for something in your car and it happens. So
yeah. But again, if you insist on doing a yoga practice, keep in mind that you don't want to be twisting. If you're going to forward fold, keep your back arched and work more straight vertical bends. All right, now we're going to move on to the shoulders.
My favorite. And
there are so many ways to injure the shoulders.
It's the most mobile joint in the body. So you already have a lot of rotation, even if you feel tight in the shoulders. So it's easy for some of us to become hypermobile, and then you can lack strength, which leads to a lot of other problems.
Right?
So. And
we see different things depending on, like, you know, what we teach and everything else. So she's going to talk about the most classic
chaturanga.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big one. So when you're first starting in your yoga practice, or you're trying to fix your practice, the vinyasa, which is in Ashtanga as well, you find that high plank position and you move through your flow. And so right now her shoulders are stacked over her wrists. So do a good chaturanga first.
A good chaturanga.
A good one. So her shoulders are level with the elbows, and then move through your up dog if you like.
Oh, up dog?
Yeah. And then go back through downward facing dog. Good. Now she's going to do a wrong one. So
I'm going to try.
Or try. After 19 years, it's hard to do it wrong, right?
It looks something like
this. So she stuck her butt out, she arched her back, there was no round in the spine, her shoulders are dropped entirely down. Okay, so just relax. You can sit up. So what's wrong with this is that no matter how you're doing it wrong, if your alignment is off, particularly in this position, you can lead to damaging the wrists as well. But since we're focusing on the shoulders right now, what happens is that we create these imbalances in our body, whether we're compensating with traps on the top or your rhomboids become weak, the muscles in between the shoulder blades. It can happen at any point in the shoulder. There's so much going on here that it's incredibly important to keep yourself honest in your chaturangas. So as we mentioned in the start, even if that means putting your knees down. So go ahead and do a modified one. So she's in her high plank, she puts her knees down, lowers down just to the point where her shoulders are level with the elbows, and then she can move through the rest of her practice safely without damaging the shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important to push through the hand, not dump into the root. People, I see that often, like with the pick up and jump back. People want to pick up and jump back, but they're not using their roots. You always want to push through your foundation to get strength. Again, work from the joint, work from the root, work from the attachment. Don't collapse into it. You'll wear it out, okay?
So even in your chaturangas, you're already opening here, which is going to lead into what Paige is going to talk about next.
The downward dog, yeah. Downward dog is another one where we do it over and over and over again. I teach a kind of a different downward dog. I teach you to take the weight out of your upper body. But a lot of times what students do is, their hands are kind of here and they're hunched, right? Not really good. You want to actually turn the hands out a degree, work the elbows in, and now we create space in the shoulders here, right in the chest, so we can take our weight back into our legs. But if we're here, it's really hard to do that. And I don't know if you guys have a good view. If I am in this position, right?
So her shoulders are rotating as if she's trying to almost like touch her fingertips together. And then correctly, she's rotating them into midline. It's like you're almost opening a jar by turning both palms out, but this rotation happens from the shoulders. So it's like she's pulling in this way.
Yes, so you want to make sure that you're creating space there and not hunching, right? This, not this.
Yeah. If you ever feel like you're trying to kiss your own hands, it's bad.
Yeah. Now, what I see a lot is people, especially in back bends. So students they'll try to find a good rotation from the shoulder, but they find it here instead of finding it here, okay? The natural rotation is inward. And when we go inward, go ahead and stand in front of me, Maddie, and I'm just this is my better shoulder, so I'm gonna actually have you, I'm gonna hold on to you. And then try to stand to the side so they can see. And now just keep walking backwards. And you can see that my arm is going, and I have no shoulder pain. I am moving, okay. I am moving in the correct rotation of the joint, which can go on pretty far. But if I have this stance, now I'm locking. I literally can't go any further than here.
Yeah.
Okay? That is a great way to damage your shoulders. And that's a huge thing that I see with students. Part of it is weakness, okay? They don't have the muscles here, the strength here to hold this position, okay? So you want to make sure that, well, first what you could do is you could actually test. You could say, do I have the mobility? And if I have the mobility, like I held on to her and we kept going, then we know it's a strength issue. Maybe it's a mobility issue and you just have to work on opening it, okay? And you would do that maybe by putting a strap around your arms or holding a block, something that kind of forces that inward rotation until you have a little bit more softness, okay? If it's a strength issue, it's kind of the same thing, okay? You want to actually, if you can, maybe find something behind you that you can reach for to activate this, okay? In Ashtanga, we would try to go for our legs, our heels, whatever. Maybe you're not an Ashtanga practitioner, so maybe you reach for a bar behind you. Something to where when you go to clasp, you're now activating your side body. But it's super important to move from the shoulder girdle and not damage. This is another thing I actually see in downward dog, is this, okay, this kind of stance. So again, really important to keep the elbows moving in, training that rotation so that we were creating space in the shoulder and we're not damaging this. This will wear out real quickly. I personally got close to some bad injuries here because I was a gymnast, right? And gymnasts, what we do all day long, okay? So, but I didn't like the way it felt. And I realized that when I would go to do deeper actions in my body, that doing it from this position was extremely painful, and I had a lot of pinching. So I knew I had to find another way. I went through a lot of retraining on my own to actually find the rotation. Then I realized it needed to come inward, not outward. And it took a while, I'm not gonna lie. It took a while to rebuild this. But it's super important that you learn the correct rotation of the shoulder. And then also, a lot of what I see as far as injuries going in is hypermobility. And this is kind of for the whole body, but especially the shoulders. If you're hypermobile, again, don't dump into your shoulders. A good example of this would be like, I see students in Ashtanga, they'll pick up and jump back from here, and they'll actually dump into the shoulder. See how I'm dumping here now? Like I'm leaning my weight into the shoulder. That'll wear out your shoulder too, okay? So when you pick up straight, don't dump, all right? Because if you do that, you'll wear out the shoulder girdle. And that's a mobility problem. That's not a tight person's problem, okay? But I've done that one too, not because I wasn't aware, but because I was tired, okay? And you know, then I end up with in my chiropractor's office, and she's putting my shoulder back in its place, literally. So those are some of the shoulder issues that we come across. If you have shoulder problems, then we have to modify it. So we'll talk about that next. If you do find yourself with a shoulder injury, what would you do? Typically in yoga, you're not going to blow out your shoulder like you would. Like, it's not like in baseball where you're pitching and now you've torn something, right? Or baseball where football where you get attacked, right? It's not that aggressive, okay?
Hopefully not.
If you find a shoulder issue, the two most common pains that like I've come across are where you're dumping in the shoulder and now you have pain right along the top here, right, or the bottom, like this area here. That's when you know you need to back off and re-rotate, change the rotation. You can save yourself a major injury by just backing off and changing the rotation, okay? If let's say you're doing chaturanga, because I did dislocate my shoulder slightly once. If that happens, you'll know because chaturanga hurts in the pectoralis muscle, okay? And honestly, I needed a good chiropractic adjustment. I mean, really, that's all it kind of took, was to just have someone put it back into place, and the pinching went away, okay? But what I would say in the interim, right, with the changing of the rotation of your shoulder, get off your upper body for a little bit. Like save yourself the energy and just get off your upper body. Don't do all your upward dogs, do cobra instead. You know, make your practice a little bit more yin for that time and a little bit less yang, okay? So, you know, go to a chiropractor and find out if that's what it is, if you have a pinching pain. Otherwise, you know, just back off.
Yeah, I would add that if you're getting radiating pain down the shoulder, then it can be a nerve issue, or if you're getting pain up into the neck, and then at that point you really need to go to the doctor. There's something wrong that you need to get checked out. But as you said, like modify, take cobra, skip the downward facing dog if it's irritating the shoulder. Like be humble, build that. Don't start your practice from ego. Right?
Yeah, you can still work the lower body. You know what I mean? You don't have to always go full throttle. I'm a huge fan of chiropractors. I think they definitely, they can fix a lot of, my right shoulder actually is permanently, like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like gridlock traffic in Los Angeles, okay? Like my hamstrings are like the superhighway that like are never congested.
Like the Autobahn.
Right. But like my right shoulder, it's the way I was born, right? And the shoulder blade always comes up, the shoulder always rotates forward. It's just my anatomy, it's always been that way. So therefore, I am prone to shoulder issues, not necessarily injuries, but this is a chronic handicap that I have to deal with, pulling it back. And it does. Like when I started 4th series, you know, in Ashtanga, I was constantly pulling it out, not in like I wasn't hanging from my shoulder girdle, but I was pulling it enough out to where, you know, I could tell. I'd go to sleep at night and it would fall asleep on me, you know what I mean? I'd wake up with my arm asleep. And so there's a lot of like stuff that moves around when you get into a deeper level of the practice. And I think it's good to kind of know the difference between like, oh, I'm actually realigning my shoulder.
Right.
It's not injured, I'm just realigning it. Because that does happen a lot too.
And again, that's that difference between discomfort and pain. You have to know and build your awareness.
Yeah, if you can't lift a glass of water, right, without a shooting pain,
It's bad.
you've got something you need to address, okay? And in that case, get off your mat, all right? But if something feels uncomfortable, play with your foundation, make sure your alignment's proper, make sure your rotations are in order, and most likely you're just moving something around. I have had students say to me, oh my gosh, my arms are going numb this week, but they're going deeper in their back bends.
Right.
Okay, well now we've opened up a channel in their shoulders that has never been opened, and things are moving around. So don't panic, don't freak out, just know that you're moving in the right direction, or check to make sure you're moving in the right direction with your anatomy. If you are, you're most likely just working new meridians, okay? If you can't lift a glass of water, that's a whole nother problem.
Different story.
So, yes, and don't ever be afraid if something isn't going away to call your doctor, call your chiropractor and get it checked out.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would say is that a lot of these injuries, particularly for the shoulder, start when people get into more and more inversions and you start overtraining. The shoulder is very sensitive. If you're not used to a lot of conditioning and you start practicing every single day, it can cause damage, right?
Yeah, it's super important, and it's super important for your hypermobile students as well, that if you collapse in your foundation, everything else is collapsed, okay? You always have to work from the ground up. Push through your foundation, find that lift, and make sure that you're stacking and that the joints are in the socket when you put weight on them, okay? If the joints are not in the socket when you put weight on them, you will have an issue down the road. Okay, so always keep that in mind. Now we're going to move on to wrists. Wrists are a big one. Pretty much in any form of yoga where you put weight on the hands, right?
Pretty much.
The thing that I've noticed, we've noticed different things, but also similar things. And just, you know, as a general rule, do not practice on carpet.
Or anything soft or foamy, like a gymnastic mat. It's not the best place for your hands for a long period of time.
If you're going to put weight on your hands, if you're just going to do forward folds, who cares? But if you're going to do anything where there's weight on the hands, keep yourself off of a soft surface because you create hyperextension, okay?
So that comes into the start of your practice. You're picking a prop and you have the choice between a hard block like this or a cork block, those are awesome, and a foam block. Don't choose the foam block because when you put weight in it, as she said, you're going to hyperextend your wrist and cause a lot of problems later on. So if you have the choice between this and nothing, choose nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing that I notice the most actually is with the hand position, and I see this a lot in Ashtanga with like Pincha Mayurasana, Karandavasana, or any of the arm balances or transitions, okay, where you're kind of putting weight on your hand. What happens is people have a tendency to pull the thumb away from the rest of the hand. And then when they go to put weight on the hand, a lot of times, and this isn't intentional, but what happens is you get tired, you get weak, you slip, something happens, and now we pull weight into the thumb joint. This is like probably the biggest injury that I see. I've had it myself, okay? It's horrible. This kind of pain is horrible. And it's not something that you need to go to the doctor over. It's just a big ego check, okay? That you now have to be extremely mindful and extremely careful, and you can still practice, but you end up having to put the weight to modify in the other part of the hand for a while. And that takes an incredible amount of training to do your arm balances modified, okay? It's not impossible.
Doesn't sound fun.
Yeah. you know, and maybe like if you're a third series practitioner, we can talk about that, okay? But for the most part, right, don't leave your thumb hanging on the outskirts of the rest of your hand, because you never know, you know, it's all it takes is a split second for your weight to be off and for all of it to shift, and now you've pulled this joint, okay? And it's, like I said, it's horrific. You can still practice with it, but until it heals, and it is safe to actually practice on it as long as you're as long as you keep the hand together. It's just really uncomfortable, okay? So if you want to plow through your practice and still do it, you can with this kind of injury, but you might want to wrap your hand as a reminder to keep it together. It's just so that way you don't, you know, aggravate it more. It will heal on its own. Again, you don't have to go to the doctor over something like this, but it hurts, okay? The other thing that I see, and this is usually with third series practitioners, is stiff wrists. And it happens as a result of really pushing through your foundation. You're just working, you're creating so much muscle here and so much friction in this area that it ends up getting stiff. And oftentimes you end up with kind of like a bubble on the hands. It's not really an injury so much, it's just something that you have to work through. It's very common in third series. The best recommendation that I can give is to move on the breath and really focus on your bandhas so you're not totally collapsing when you get tired into your frame, because that's what happens, is we're plowing through those arm balances one after the other, and we end up just taking weight in other areas as a result. So that's classically what I see from an Ashtanga perspective. What do you see?
Much different, but I imagine if I was teaching a number of arm balances in a series, that's what I would see as well. What I see most common is when first people start to set their hands down, is what happens is this is your first knuckle to the base of the index finger. If there's a gap between the first knuckle and the ground, this means that you're not pressing through the entire hand. It should always feel like, even in your downward facing dog, that if you tried really, really hard and if the forearms became strong enough, you could almost lift the base of the wrist up. And what this is testing is that you're not dumping the weight into the base of that wrist. I've known a few people to develop cysts in their wrists from doing that because they were dumping into the palm of their hand here in the base of the wrist rather than being evenly distributed throughout the hand. So that's the most major one I see. The other ones are just alignment based, where I tell people it's either the index finger or the middle finger, depending on when you fold your wrist here, you develop this crease in the wrist. You want that crease to be parallel to the front of your mat. Whether, for me, it's my middle finger. For some people, it is their index finger. So there's either a slight rotation out or the middle finger is facing forward. And again, that activation and pushing through the entire hand, not just the base of the wrist.
Yeah, someone wouldn't get very far in my class if they weren't pushing through the hands. So I guess that's why I don't see that injury much, because that's kind of a day one rule with me, is to always root. But yeah, with that, you want to make sure that, just like with the shoulders, this is your foundation, right? So if we're doing an arm balance, we're doing chaturanga, we're doing downward dog, like this is your root here. So you want to always push through the foundation and work up. Okay, if you follow that rule, you can't go wrong, okay? It's when we collapse down, when we get lazy, when we try to put the weight in one part of the hand versus the other instead of using the entire root for our foundation. So be mindful. Some of the things that I have students do is actually spread their fingers and grip the floor, not to keep it there, but just to have the exercise of finding their roots. Palm of the hand is going to be where 90% of your weight is, okay? So make sure you have strong, good contact with the floor, with the palm of your hand, and always make sure, just like with your shoulder over your wrist, you want to have the same thing, not just to prevent shoulder injuries, but to prevent wrist injuries too, okay?
Yeah.
Anything else?
I would just say that if you are experiencing a wrist injury, which I've experienced and you have as well, you could always modify by placing the forearms down instead, or just skipping those parts of your practice for a while. A lot of wrist injuries develop from, if you've got those weak forearms and you're doing a lot of hand balancing or inversions, that's when you start to see those. So then start to find either an occupational therapist for a wrist, or talk to your yoga instructor about what you can do to make it better.
If you're a very advanced practitioner, this is only for very advanced practitioners, okay? Only. third series and up, okay? If that's the case and you have a wrist aggravation, you can modify, you can actually jump through with a fist. Okay, so you put the weight into the fist to jump through, to jump back. In Ashtanga only. I do not recommend that you do this if you are a beginner, because if you aren't, then you will not know how to stabilize from the base up in the shoulder from that position. Okay,
there's no balance in the hands when you're on the fists. None.
Yeah, so it's literally just for that moment of transition in and out, okay? I wouldn't do an arm balance this way, absolutely not. This is just like I'm picking up and jumping back. And you don't even want to do it long term, like maybe one practice here and there. But the problem is when we do modify, we create imbalance. Okay, so it's also really important to note that, like, if you're going to modify one side,
do it on both.
You might want to modify both, right? Otherwise, 6 months goes by and your right hip is really open and your left one's not.
Yeah, and the other thing, so we talked about this earlier, was that if you've got an injury in the shoulder, what can happen, or the same hip, it can go down, is that if you have an injury in the shoulder, it can translate to one of the wrists where you have an injury here, so you're leaning more onto that left side. So you start to damage this and you start to strain this wrist and this forearm because it's taking more of the brunt of the weight and the force of your movements. And so you could also see that where if there's an injury in the hip, it's going to translate to the knees. So if you're experiencing an injury on one side, then start to look up and have someone watch your practice and see if there's anything where, are you shifting the weight dramatically to one side? Are you really tight in another area that's causing this imbalance?
Yeah, because you will cause an imbalance. I mean, there's just no way to get around it. That's why you want to be mindful when you do modify your injuries, that you do it on both sides and that you're not compensating. I was compensating for my knee injury, right? So I switched my lotus for almost a year to the point where I forgot what was normal. I just did left leg first for so long that I actually forgot, like, the standard of right foot before left. And
muscle memory.
Yeah, so, and that's not like a bad situation necessarily for that one specifically, but I've also had injuries where, I go really deep into a twist on one side because my knee's fine, but on the other side I can't go as deep. And I've had teachers actually really feel the difference in my body because I've been compensating for so long. So, be mindful of the imbalances that you could create as a result of modifying your injuries. And like I said, with the fist thing, only if you are an extremely advanced practitioner, I'm talking 10 years or more, okay, would you do that because you have enough isolated muscle movements to where you can balance that weight for a second when you do your vinyasas. Otherwise, don't touch it, and stick with just not doing the vinyasas. So I hope that this was helpful for you guys. And again, we are not medical professionals. This is just based on our years as yoga teachers and practitioners, like what we've been through and what we've seen on the mat, how we've modified personally, and how we've had our students modify. If you do have a serious injury, then you need to consult a medical practitioner. And that's about it. I'm going to finish up with some side notes and we'll, call it a day.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, I just want to say one more time, we are not medical professionals, okay? This is just based on our experience, okay? Never hesitate to go to the doctor. But that being said, it's really important to gauge maybe when to go to the doctor, okay? You don't want to just run off to a doctor just because you had a weird sensation in class one day. If what you're feeling lasts a day, write it out. If it's been a week or two, then make an appointment, okay? Know the difference between what your body would constitute as pain versus discomfort, okay? I have so many students that can't differentiate just that one alone. So that might take you a while to figure out. But also, with yoga, it's not just a feel-good practice, okay? Asana, when we do enough of it, we end up restructuring our bodies, realigning our bodies, moving things around in our bodies, and a lot of times things can get worse before they get better. So as you go and you're restructuring your shoulders, and for a month you have numbness while the muscles are moving around that nerve, your doctor's probably going to look at you like you're crazy because they'll do an x-ray and they're not going to find anything, right? It's because the muscles are just in transition. So be patient enough to know that probably what you're experiencing more than likely is just your body realigning itself, okay? I've had all kinds of sensations over the years. I've had really crippling ones, and I've had really like strange ones, and then I've had like the, oh, there it is again. And you know, it takes time to get used to these. I mean, I've had fire go down my thigh, okay? Like straight up fire from the nerves go down my thigh. I have finished practice and I've been flushed, totally red flush, like I just took niacin. You know, I've had shooting pains in my wrist, shooting pains in my knees. I've had sensations in my hips that I'm like, I don't know if that is a good thing or a bad thing, okay? Part of the process of yoga is learning how to differentiate and go with the flow. I will say this though, after 19 years of my yoga practice, I have a completely new body. I'm an inch taller, my structure's different, my alignment's different, I stand taller, right? Like my rib cage is actually bigger than it used to be because of my breath. There's a lot of structural changes that I've made to my body just from years of practice. So know that, you know, if you're finding weird sensations in your body, most of them probably aren't injuries. They're just changes that you're going through, okay?
Yeah, I would say the bottom line for this is that if you don't want to be injured, then listen to your body, stay with your breath, stay present the entire time you're moving through your practice, and don't rush in or out of a pose. And then when you are injured, don't let it be a reason not to practice. Be an opportunity to grow and build awareness to something else in your practice, whether it's your breath or that sense of humility that you don't have to do every arm balance if your wrist is injured, that your practice doesn't rely on the ego.
Yeah, so much of the practice is internal, not external, right? So if you can't do a pose, that's your yoga practice, is learning how to back away.
Yeah, started as a chance to practice yoga off the mat.
And if you
on your mat.
Yeah, and if you do have an injury, take it as an opportunity to become more mindful, more aware, more humble, and more like to give your body more respect for how amazing it really is and all that it can do. Anything else, dear?
I would say I think I learned the most about myself and my practice from some of my injuries.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely know a lot about the body from my injuries. So anyway, but I hope you guys enjoyed this course. And again, you know, this is you know, just to bring you more awareness into your own practice. This is not a how-to tutorial as far as like, you know, if you've ripped a ligament, you know.
Go to the doctor.
Exactly. So, but I'm glad that you joined us, and I hope to see you guys next time. Namaste.